bit, hoping that folks come in. Okay. Good evening. My name is Pablo de Jesus, and I'm the Executive Director of Unitarian Universalists for Social Justice. We're so happy to have you this evening. I'm going to ask that we start off by doing that typical UU thing. Please put in the chat your name, your state, your congregation, your preferred pronouns, a land acknowledgement if you are called to do so. We want to do this in order to give Katie and Reverend Dr. Beth a sense of who is in the room with them, who they are speaking to. We're so pleased to have them. We want them to know what kind of a community has gathered to hear their message this evening.
It is wonderful to see so many people coming in. There are a couple of names that I recognize. So it's good to see folks.
I will also ask that everybody mind your mics. Unfortunately, UUSJ doesn't have one of those webinar packages. So if you leave your mic open, we will hear your 8-year-old, like the one that I have in the background, or your dog or your cat. So try to mind your mic. If you're taking care of your household or bodily needs, be aware that the video camera is on you unless you turn it off. And just again, we're very happy to have you. We're just waiting a moment or so for the audience to gather. And in the interim, I'm asking everyone to put into the chat their name, their preferred pronouns, their church, their state, a land acknowledgement if you are called to do so. I guess I'll add to that, if you can share with us something that gives you hope for the future. So often as Unitarian Universalists, we're focused on fixing things. The part of having the energy to fix things and make things better and reform things is keeping an eye and a heart thread on what gives us hope. So again, my name is Pablo de Jesus. I'm the Executive Director of the Unitarian Universalists for Social Justice, your hosts this evening for our two wonderful guests. We have, excuse me, Reverend Dr. Beth Johnson and Katie Thomas Carroll Esquire. So they're going to be speaking to us in just a little bit. So Paulette, would you do us a favor and spotlight Reverend Dr. Beth as I begin to introduce Reverend Dr. Beth? So for those who didn't catch it on the website, Reverend Dr. Beth Johnson is the minister of the Unitarian Church of Hinsdale, Illinois, not too far outside of Chicago. Reverend Dr. Beth works on intersectional justice issues, including immigration, racial and just worker justice, climate and environmental justice, LGBTQIA, and reproductive justice issues. Reverend Dr. Beth has served on numerous boards where faith and justice meet. And Reverend Beth is a certified spiritual director who provides spiritual direction, workshops, and retreats for faith leaders and for activists to help them foster personal and systemic transformational change. She is committed to sacred activism, linking spirituality and radical social change. Her approach is grounded in trauma-informed somatic practices and breathwork. She serves on the coordinating committee of Illinois' Poor People's Campaign and as the co-chair of the Unitarian Universalist Association Poor People's Campaign Leadership Council, helping UUs across the nation engage with the Poor People's Campaign. And I just want to add here that as Executive Director of Unitarian Universalists for Social Justice, I have the opportunity to travel alongside and with many UU ministers in doing the work of social justice. And I just really want everyone to know that Reverend Beth is one of our best among UUs. She gets what the work means in its various dimensions and multiple facets. and she knows how to connect that to our faith. So I think that she's one of our special UU stars, and I'm very happy to have her this evening.
Mm.
And with that, I invite Reverend Dr. Beth to open a sacred space for us, perhaps like the chalice,
And
but
we'll
in
do
all
that.
cases, set the tone.
Pablo, thank you for that wonderful introduction. And I'm thrilled to be here to share. Anytime I get to share space or time and actions with you, Pablo, it is a blessing. You inspire me. And I'm glad that we are journeying together. And Katie, I'm really looking forward to your message. So thank you so much. Yes, my pronouns are she, they, and I am in the western suburbs of Chicago that are the traditional territories of the Kickapoo, Peoria, Potawatomi, and many others, actually, some whose names have been lost to us. So it is just really, really wonderful to be with you. As we gather, I would like to invite you to breathe with me, if that's comfortable for you to do so. And just arrive. Breathing in and connecting to the various parts of our day, the various parts of our lives, and even the various parts of ourselves. And if it's comfortable for you to do so, I invite you to simply notice your breath as it flows in and out. Simply notice the rhythm of your natural breath. And allow the breath to bring you into that place in your body that is your center. Or you can simply notice your surroundings. If hearing is available to you, what do you hear? If sight is available to you, what do you see? You feel your clothing on your body or air on your skin. You simply arrive. Simply arrive to this time, in this place, with these people. Friends, you could have been anywhere this evening, but you chose to be here. Not only are we grateful for that, but it speaks to the desire that we all have to be present, to embody our faith, to engage with our values, and to empower action on our deepest moral values. We gather on this day, the 56th anniversary of when the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, as he called for a moral revolution of values, who had said 5 years earlier, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. What affects one directly affects all indirectly. For Unitarian Universalists, we affirm our interdependence as a core value, as a grounding principle of our faith. A faith that I think calls us at once inward to discern the depth of our interconnectedness. And that also calls us outward to act on the fact of that interdependence. Because this is what we know. Everything is connected. Everything is at stake. And everything we do matters. In this interdependent web of existence, our actions matter because bodies count. Our bodies, animal bodies, the earth body. I know you know this. For too long, humans have lived as if we are separate, isolated beings, betraying the irrefutable fact of our interdependence with all things and all living systems from which we emerged, upon which we depend, to whom we're responsible. Earth, what we call our blue boat home. So many are estranged from life itself, and this Estrangement has made us sick, and it is killing us. It has made us humans and otherwise sick in body, as the poorest and most vulnerable people suffer the most from the effects of climate disruption and the degradation and despoliation of the earth. This estrangement has made us sick in our souls. It causes soul sickness to live split from the source of that which gives us life. To place a death-dealing economic system above the living systems of earth and the living beings upon it betrays the sacred trust of our species to care for life. The fact of our interconnectedness means that when we pollute, destroy the earth, we are doing that to ourselves, each other, future generations, and all life near and far. The earth's systems, the earth's species, and our very souls. Everything is connected. Everything is at stake. And everything we do matters. Now, to be clear, that does not mean that you have to do everything. You do what love calls you to do with the capacity that you have. As we live in these times of great upheaval, of occupation and of genocide, and experience all the things that open and break our hearts. My teacher, Joanna Macy, says, a heart that's broken open can hold the world. And so I invite you not to be afraid of a broken heart, but to know that it is a sign of your interdependence. It is a sign of your connection. And beloved, it is even an opportunity for joy, a joy that is not dependent upon external circumstances, but a joy that is a reminder of our connectedness. It is our faith, our Unitarian Universalist faith, that calls us. Our faith, our love, our passion, and our commitment to being and building the beloved community that brings us to this time and this place where, again, you could be doing anything else. Some of you left your dinner to be here on time. Some of you are going to go past your bedtime if you're on the East Coast, possibly. But this is what we know, that love is calling. There is love at work. I believe that, and hope, which simply means we don't know the future. So alight our chalice, beloveds. May faith inspire us, love empower us, and hope sustain us in all that we do. It is good to be together.
Amen, Ashe. Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Beth. I'm going to give us a moment to sit with that. And now it is my deep pleasure to introduce Katie Thomas Carroll, Esquire, Director of Energy and Environment Programs for the Congressional Progressive Caucus Center, also known as the CPC Center. The CPC Center is a 501c3 nonprofit that identifies and develops solutions to build a more just, equitable, and resilient nation. And for those of you who are at all familiar with UUSJ's mission, you will hear some sympathy in our calls to action. Before joining the center, Katie worked as staff director for the U.S. House of Representatives Oversight Subcommittee on the Environment for Representative Ro Khanna. And before that, she was senior policy advisor for energy and environment to Senator Bernie Sanders. Now, I'm sad to say that I did not know Katie when she was doing these awesome things, but I am very proud to say that since Katie has joined the center, our paths have crossed, and I have to share with everyone that I been struck on many occasions by her brilliance. The comments that she makes, the insights that she offers, her strong kung fu on process, it's all very impressive. And so even before I knew that she was a Unitarian Universalist, I invited her to come talk to us. And then I happily discovered that she has been attending Unitarian Universalist churches for a while. So with that, I'm going to get out of the way. I'm going to pass the mic to Katie, and I'm going to allow her to share her beauty and insight with all of us this evening. Thank you so much, Katie.
I can tell that I'm a little red from how honored I am to hear you say those things. That's really nice to hear, Pablo. Thank you so much. I am very grateful to be here with all of you tonight. Thank you for delaying your dinner or putting off that TV show to be here with us tonight to talk about love and faith in action in our federal government. I am joining you tonight from San Diego, California, where my wife and I live. But prior to living here, we were in the District of Columbia, where I spent 10.5 years in and around that area. But before that, I've attended Unitarian churches in starting in Fort Collins, Colorado, which is where I grew up. And I saw that there's somebody here in the chat from Fort Collins. Hi, hello. And then, also attended Unitarian Church in Carbondale, Illinois. Hi, or here from Carbondale from my old Or runs a renewable energy company, and I used to work for Or in Illinois, in southern Illinois, very far away from where Reverend Dr. Beth is. And I've had the honor to visit UU churches in New York and all over. And so I've very happily, even though I also identify as a Christian, and very happily for a very long time identified as a UU, because really anywhere in the world that you are, you will be welcomed in to the UU home. And that's always been my experience. So I'm grateful tonight to be able to maybe give back a little bit in the way that I have been fed so many times and so often spiritually by UU churches, again, all over the place. So let me start by saying I'm here in my personal capacity. We definitely want to talk about my work too, but we are mixing faith, the state, church, and politics, and of course those things are no to mix. But tonight we're gonna braid them together, and this is the first time I'm really kind of doing that out loud myself too, in this type of a setting. So my professional background, I actually have I am an attorney, and I have a master's in environmental law and policy. And so right after law school, I actually went and I was a real lawyer for a minute and represented municipal and cooperative electric utilities in front of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which is the federal agency that regulates electricity sale at the wholesale level. And so I got to learn a lot about the electric utilities at that time, and about why I do not ever want to work at a law firm ever again, because I am not built for that. And instead, I was blessed to have an opportunity to come work for Bernie Sanders, because I had attended Vermont Law School. And so that was like the Vermont tie. Was able to go and work for Bernie through both presidential campaigns. Had the honor of doing all of his climate, tribal, territorial policy for 5.5 years. And then when the Senate was sort of in its weird 50-50 split, but the House won the majority, I had an opportunity to jump over to the House side to be staff director for Ro Khanna from Silicon Valley, who I absolutely adore. And he let us run wild investigating the fossil fuel industry last Congress. So we got to send subpoenas to Exxon, Chevron, Shell, BP, the American Petroleum Institute, and the U.S. Chamber of Congress. And we had a lot of fun with that. So yes, Chuck, I see you here from Vermont as well. Love my UUs in Vermont as well. So lots and lots of connections from all over the place, but just kind of wanted to give you a little bit of a sense of how all of these things have come together and why they mix and why they make sense for us to talk about tonight. And I wanted to start before I really get into the nitty-gritty of some advice that I've collected together for you all tonight, procedurally on my advice about how to engage with the federal government. I wanted to ground us sort of in our faith and in a sacred foundation. So for that reason, I actually am going to bring us 2 readings tonight from the Gospel of Matthew. So again, you'll have to indulge me because I am a Christian, and for me, my faith, I actually think the whole reason I became interested in climate change in the first place was because it was made clear to me that the least among us were going to be impacted first and worst. And so the book of Matthew calls to us to make the most of the least of us. So I know I want to share, obviously, not everybody is familiar with the Bible. So I want to make sure I do my dangest to keep everybody with me. So I'm pretty sure everybody knows who Jesus is, but in the Gospels, so parts of the Bible, which we all know was written by humans, part of what they wrote about that they heard Jesus say was basically Jesus is getting challenged and asked, like, what authority do you have to tell us what to do? And like, what even is this that you're preaching? Like, how, we've been taught that faith alone can get us into heaven. And really what Jesus does is try to break that down and show through these passages that faith alone is insufficient and faith in action is really what brings us. So I'm going to start with Matthew 19:21. And I love this because I think Dr. Reverend Beth also started us off with fighting against like the capitalist systems that are degrading the earth. So this passage says, basically, Jesus is asked, like, how do you get into heaven? And Jesus answers, if you want to be perfect, like if you want to go above and beyond and be all the way perfect, go and sell all of your possessions and give them to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and then come and follow me. So it isn't amass everything you can in this lifetime. It's literally go be poor. And that's how you'll be the first in line to be, to get this right, to be somebody who's in moral standing. And so there's all these parables he keeps going through, and he's just trying to break it down into plain language for folks to get them to understand like really what it is that faith in action looks like. And so my absolute favorite Bible verse, and what really I think defines my time on the Hill and what I hope will ground us tonight, is actually Matthew 25:31-40. So then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. And I kind of want to break that down too, because I think it's really interesting that the hungry, those who are thirsty, those who need clothes, those who are in prison are those who are called out for us to serve. But the righteous will answer him, but we didn't feed you when you were hungry. We didn't deal with you, like this passage says. And the Lord will say, when you saw a stranger and invited him in, whenever you did this for one of the least of these among me, you did it for me. So I think this is where we are called to serve each other, to serve the least among us, to make sure that in order to be in, the most moral standing we can be, we put those who are most vulnerable first. And so I think that is something that should really guide the way that especially we work with climate justice in particular, because the science tells us that not only are we already experiencing climate impacts, And we are already seeing this phenomenon to be true, but we do continue to anticipate that those who will be impacted first and worst are most likely Black and Brown communities, Indigenous communities, and communities who have been historically left behind or deindustrialized. So we owe a special moral obligation to those types of communities as we work forward for a climate just future. And so tonight I wanted our conversation to be grounded in the Gospel of Matthew. So thank you for indulging me in reading from a little bit of the Bible. So a little bit of what I wanted to explain to you all tonight is basically just, we've all heard the How a Bill Becomes Law song, but it hopefully doesn't shock you to know that sort of how the vegan sausage, the plant-based sausage gets made is sometimes a little bit different. And I think that is unfortunately especially true in the more recent past, because what was considered regular order and how the government used to function regularly for a very long time has broken down. And I don't think that it is lost on any of us that our democracy and our government are fracturing. And we really have to be very careful because a democracy is a horrible thing to lose. And we here in the United States are about, almost 300 years, 250 plus years removed from the last upheaval. But if we look at around the world, we do see fascism on the rise. We do see hard right-wing movements winning political battles elsewhere. We are seeing dictators be elected for life type thing. And we have people here in the United States who have also said that they would like that to be a thing here. So I think we need to take that very seriously and see how, especially the work we can do in fighting climate change, but fighting for communities who are going to be most impacted can also help us save our democracy. So in the old days, a regular order would be that a member would introduce a bill. It would be a great idea. The bill would get referred to a committee of jurisdiction. So let's say it was a bill all about how the electric grid works. So in the House, in the United States House, for example, that bill is going to get referred to the U.S. House Committee on Energy and Commerce. And then the House E&C committee might hold a hearing and they'll have witness testimony about the bill and they'll get input about the things that work and the things that don't work. And then after the hearing, you'll have a committee vote where the committee brings together a number of bills that have had legislative hearings. And then the members will have an opportunity to vote on the bills as they come through. Then once a committee passes a bill, the bill gets referred to the broader House, the United States House or United States Senate. And then the bill can, I'm gonna take us all the way through how a bill becomes a law before I talk about how a bill dies. But on the floor, the member likely will then shop it around, will grow support, will maybe add co-sponsors, and then eventually the bill could get a standalone vote among a number, maybe a slate of bills that are going to get passed. That's very common in the House, that they pick up a handful of bills and they pass a slate of them, or you can vote on them individually. Much more common, however, is attaching something that you'd like to pass that's like maybe a little piece, something about the electric grid, to a much larger package that is already moving. So in the when President Biden was first elected and we had control of the White House, the Senate, and the United States House of Representatives, that's called a trifecta. And that made it very easy for us to pass things through all three, to pass things out of both houses of Congress and get them signed by the president. Obviously, anymore, we don't have a trifecta because the Republicans control the House. So it's much more likely that something that would be progressive, that would garner the support of the UUSJ, would be something that's moving already. So some examples of those types of packages are, you know, the annual spending bills, the bills that keep the government open. And then unfortunately, our national defense bill is considered must pass. So our nation's ginormous inflated defense budget is something that moves once a year. Every single year it gets a vote and it passes. There's lots of other examples. It's supposed to be that every 5 years there's a farm bill, but like, for example, this year we're supposed to be in it and we're not. So a lot of what, again, I would consider regular order are the types of things that we kind of could have always hung our hats on. We don't necessarily always have, but that's why we're getting more creative and, you know, thinking outside of the box. So another option is just to get enough support among leadership to just do the dang thing. So in the Senate, what it's called is basically a manager's package. So things that are basically not going to get objected to in the Senate can just be added by the leadership to a bill that's going to get a vote. And in this House, it's even easier because basically the way the House works in general is just majority rule, period. So most certainly when you're dealing with Republican leadership, as we are in this sense, in this context, we're definitely talking more about probably working with in the sense of working with a manager's package and finding something that we could more or less stomach to trade for. And so a good another good must pass bill that I was going to bring up that will be happening this year is lovingly referred to as WRDA, which is like the worst acronym ever, but it's the Water Resources Development Act. And that bill goes every 2 years and funds our state revolving loan funds for clean water, for drinking water, and for other water restoration and ecosystem habitat restoration type of funding. And that bill is usually really limited to that type of stuff, but in recent years, we've been able to start to open the wedge for climate funding in that bill, again, through our water systems, because especially with the science showing so much resiliency to be had by restoring this nation's estuaries, wetlands, and you know, basically the Everglades, more or less. If we were to restore the Everglades, it would be great for the climate. It would sequester a lot of carbon. And so it's thinking through, being creative about the things that are definitely going to get a vote or things that are definitely going to have a conversation around them in Congress, and understanding where you might have an opportunity to draw connections. So all of that is to say, to hopefully give a sense of what where each individual member, so your member of Congress, your 2 senators, where they have the opportunity to influence the process. And so to that end, you know, I think we wanted to make sure that you all understand that even in a world where there's seemingly not enough support in Congress to actually achieve maybe some of the aims that we have. We know that we need to continue to go past beyond the Inflation Reduction Act. We know that our climate is going to need more from us if we hope to live in a livable, if the next generations hope to live in a livable planet. And so to that end, we need to keep calling. And so that was, I think, part of the title of this webinar. So I want to be sure that you all understand kind of what gets communicated to the member. So there are various different staffers in a Hill office that help take in communications from the district and the nation on various different issues and get that information communicated to the member. So I would say the 3 most common things that get communicated to the member every day, sometimes every day, sometimes once a week, are constituent mail trends. So both between automatic emails, you know, like sign this petition, email your member. So we look at those, we really do. And, you know, we're going to write an answer to them. It may look form to you depending on the member. But you know, that's a mail trend. And then certainly also the postal mail trends, and then call volumes, and the issues and opinions on calls. Most members are only going to ask for the trends for those things from their district, from their constituents. Some members are going to get enough volume that they may also track national calls, but it's far less likely. And then, so I just wanted to also put them in context. I would say in terms of the amount that they kind of matter, I would say like the click email type correspondence is sort of at the bottom. And then I would say a phone call, and then I would say postal mail is the most influential of kind of the touches. And it's the idea behind that is how hard was it for the person to do the thing. It's pretty easy to pick up the phone. It's pretty easy to click the digital, but it's a little bit harder to write a custom email or write a physical letter. So I would also encourage you to think through that when you are thinking about wanting to engage with your members. And so sort of just the last thing I wanted to run through is giving you a sense of what you all can do, even in a world where we may not necessarily have, again, the trifecta where we have a democratically controlled House in addition to the Senate and the White House. So because of the way that regular order works, and because of the way that, and I would say the way the Inflation Reduction Act passed, which is the most recent climate legislation, the biggest climate legislation we've ever passed, how that got done was basically it was bills that had been reintroduced and worked on for, I mean, in some cases over a decade that I know of, that I can think of. And so it might feel like a slog to us on the outside to see a bill get reintroduced, and maybe each Congress you're only adding like a co-sponsor or two, and it feels like nothing's happening. But this is the pace at which the federal government works. It is maddening. And so you are not alone in feeling mad about how slow the federal government is in answering the enormity of the challenge that is the climate crisis. And so I would say it's really great that it would be really great for you to stay on top of the things that you care about that are being reintroduced regularly. And first of all, pay attention to the other side too. Throw up obstacles where there are dangers of a Republican controlled House getting things that are dangerous, like the border deal, or like getting the House to, or getting the White House to give up its LNG permitting pause in exchange for funding for Ukraine. For example, that's an active conversation that's happening on the Hill. And then on the other side, work to dismantle roadblocks that might be thrown up on the other side. So I would say regularly checking in with a member about what they're hearing about their bill. So they're going to start to hear pushback. You know, if you ask a member to co-sponsor a bill and they say no, then you're going to get to hear the answer why, and you can kind of help address concerns that members might have with the issue that you care about. It is an area to sort of poke at the fissures and see where change is possible. And then I kind of want to take us back to Matthew 25 and say that those of us in the climate justice movement with the privilege of time and resources to advocate for social justice really do, I think, have a moral obligation to prioritize policy changes that lift up the least among us. Certainly, even climate change, climate policy has whether there was an intent or not, has had the impact of continuing to harm communities. And so I really think it's incumbent on those of us who care about social justice to see the intersection between, housing and the climate crisis, for example, that we don't let everybody lose sight of that. And so another way that I really wanted to encourage you all to get involved and to think about tonight is the implementation of the Inflation Reduction Act, and sort of not the congressional side of the federal government, but more of the executive side, so the agencies and all of the work that's being done to send billions of dollars out from the federal government into our communities right now. And we have a lot of work we could be doing. We can be making sure that our congressional delegation in the House and in the Senate are working with the community benefit organizations in our community, with our local towns, our mayors, our counties, to ensure that they're getting what they need in terms of support from the federal government to access all that funding. Today, the EPA announced additional funding in the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund that is, again, billions of dollars that's going to go toward renewable energy, energy efficiency, all kinds of building improvements, all kinds of stuff. So that is another thing that we really have to keep track of and to pay attention to. And then as in addition to implementing the bill, what a lot of the agencies are doing right now is also it is the apparatus of the federal government that approves fossil fuels. And so we also owe communities in the Gulf South, communities in the Permian Basin, communities in the Bakken, communities in Appalachia, we owe them to really in the Central Valley of California to shut down the fossil fuel spigot and ensure that their communities are transitioned in a way that is not just respectful of the contributions that communities in those areas have made to this country, because we wouldn't be where we are without coal, for example. We would not be where we are without coal communities. And so we owe them a duty of care to transition toward clean energy in a way that takes care of the least among us. And so I know we want to leave room for questions and answers, but I hope that gives you all some inspiration to stay engaged. It isn't always easy, especially in an election year, to understand where we can influence the process and why we should continue to try, because you will be heard. You are heard. And in fact, the louder we are, the more justification we provide to our leaders to join us. I think I'll call you to remember President Obama called on us to be very loud in actually it was with regard to the climate, to be very loud in demanding that he reject the Keystone XL pipeline at the time. And because we were so loud, because we were so persistent, he was able to do that thing at the end of his second term. So there are wins to be had. They exist. They continue to exist, even when the political circumstances are not perfect. And Pablo and I, and I'm sure others, invite you to join us on this sacred journey and to make sure that our government continues to lead in love. And with that, I'll pass it back.
Thank you so much, Katie. So now we're going to transition to our question and answer segment. But yes, let's all clap. Let's all wiggle our fingers in praise and thanks of Katie's wonderful presentation. I do, before we get to the questions, I do want to just say to everybody on the call, on the 16th of April, we're going to have another great speaker, Reverend Susanna Tuttle, talking about what is the U.S. climate fair share and what is our moral obligation around that issue. So please join us. I put the link, the RSVP link in the chat. And Reverend Tuttle is another Unitarian Universalist who works out of North Carolina with their interfaith power and light. So that's going to be another great conversation. So I encourage folks to raise your electronic hand. We are recording, so we're gonna privilege people who are brave and want to ask their question, but I will invite you to try to be succinct so we can get to as many questions as possible and not to make too many statements rather than ask questions. But to kick it off, I'm going to pick up a question from the chat from our dear friend, John Peterson of Acatink Church in Virginia, who would like to know, is a personal, unique email just as important or valuable to the office as a letter? And I guess that's a question for Katie.
Yeah, I think that's a really useful question. So first of all, let me be clear in saying that I think if you have time to do all of the things, you should do all of the things, and you should feel free to do all of the things more than once a day, and you should do all of the things every day. So when I know that there's a vote that's I also just moved to California like 2 years ago from the District of Columbia, so I'm very newly used to having, like, I'm not used to having this federal representation. So my poor rep hears from me almost every day on one thing or another about whatever the House is taking up. He's also an extremely moderate Democrat, so I digress. And so I think you should do any and all of the touches you can. That said, if you have limited time, don't let the perfect become the enemy of the good, and don't let a personalized email be like, feel like you need to have a stamp on it for it to be that important. I would say either of those things is likely to get you an individualized, as opposed to like a formalized answer to whatever question or issue you've raised, which means that there will be more staff time dedicated to that issue within the staff, and that is a strategy. That is a good advocacy tactic to raise the issue and make sure that it's really being contemplated and discussed and written about among the staff.
Thank you so much, Katie. Gabriela Martinez, one of our great friends from WISC and the Franciscan Action Network. Please ask.
Yes, I will say though, like, this just really interested me, so I'm here like on a pseudo like professional, also really personal note. And I'm curious about like what your take is on like how offices like yes, they have to prioritize like all people's requests, but like do they put like a special emphasis on like people, like for instance when I send a message, I'm like, I'm a young voter. Do they like really prioritize those messages that mention young voters? Okay.
It depends. Some members will. So like I said, I've worked for Bernie. So Bernie obviously gets calls from everybody. And so Bernie, certainly would, I say, prioritize his constituents. He definitely is not quite about prioritizing Vermonters, but at the same time, because he himself established a national profile, I think he would pay attention to some of those things. He would care, especially just because he cares especially about what young people say. But I think that may vary from member to member. And then I would tell you that members do not actually have to answer to everybody. In fact, they don't have to answer to anybody, but that's not a very good strategy for getting reelected. So the only ones that they can communicate with for free, like they can, it's called franking. They can send mail, electronic or postal for free using this like congressional stamp, as long as the communication is in their district. So they are incentivized to answer and to do mailings, newsletters or whatever with their district. And then especially, I think the way that it might make more sense for young people to get at a member might be through the advocacy organizations that the members care what they say, as well as individual constituents. So we might say, 60 Vermonters opposed this, and we heard from the Sierra Club and Friends of the Earth and blah, blah, blah. And it would be like, okay, yeah, everybody hates this. And it's, the groups and the constituents. And it was always helpful to have both lists, one in each hand.
Thank you so much. Again, pulling from the chat, do you have a sense of who are the most important partners, potential partners in this work? Who are the partners, I guess the NGOs that members care the most about or pay the most close attention to?
That's tough. It's so, and I have just seen each member be so, some don't care at all about the groups. Some care so much about the groups. Some care about all the lefty groups. Some care about the big groups. Some only care about the groups in their state or their district. I think it really depends, but that said, when I was a Hill staffer, I actually do remember you, Pablo, for what it's worth. And we would hear from Interfaith Power and Light, and there were lots of faith voices. And I think interfaith voices generally is a constituency that bears weight. And so I think that's especially true if the member themselves is somebody who is a spiritual person. And then I think even if they're not, like, you recognize the power of organized religion, whether you're in it or not. So I think these faith organizations are similarly situated and just as capable of being influential as the wholly environmental groups, in my opinion.
Thank you. I like that. I want to ask, we're getting a question in the chat. In addition to WRDA, is there any other legislation that you think we should be paying attention to or advocating on this year and in preparation for the next session of Congress? I know that Food and Water Watch is happily advocating for the Water Act, and there are other things. But what do you, as one of us, what do you want to point us in the direction of?
So I helped write the Water Act. So that's like, I really love you bringing that up so much. Okay, I will get to Becca in Vermont in just a second. So WRDA is the water bill is one that moves. And I think the Water Act, while we don't necessarily expect the Water Act to like wholesale get put on the bill, one of the things in particular about the Water Act that was helpful was that we had co-sponsors and we were getting groups to support the Water Act. And there's a particular provision in there about not privatizing water, because of course water is a human right and we don't want people to just profit off of it. We want it to continue to be a public resource that people have access to healthy water. So because there's anti-privatization provisions in the Water Act, we were able to fight pro-privatization provisions on WRDA. So like, you might not have ever known that. It wasn't like the privatization provisions got attached to WRDA, but because they existed over here and they have their own support and they walk and talk on their own, we were able to use that to fight off other bad privatization provisions. Maybe that's a good example. That's like one example. Other stuff I expect to see this year, you may have seen they keep kicking the can about funding the government. So every time that happens, for better or worse, there will be opportunities to attach other things. And so frankly, a couple of things I'd like us all to be paying attention to are defensive. President Biden paused approving new LNG export terminals only, not existing ones, not the pipelines that go along with it, only the export terminals. And of course, the Republicans are losing their mind because the fossil fuel industry, is pissed off about it. And so there's an active horse trading conversation, which we should come up with a new term for horse trading. We shouldn't be trading horses. Saying that the Republicans will allow us to give more funding to Ukraine if we give up the pause and the Biden administration starts approving LNG export terminals again. What the president needs from us right now is the ability to say, sorry, Charlie, I've been hearing from everybody. I can't do this. It's too politically fraught for me to give in on this LNG pause. I have to protect the LNG pause. And so that is, again, not necessarily something, like, it might end up being legislative, but it's technically administrative right now. And then other than that, I see, what about the farm bill in the chat? And that's a great question. We were supposed to have had a full farm bill process this year. Senator Stabenow was ready. We were ready in the House. There were supposed to be hearings. There was supposed to be a whole thing. Like, we set up a whole coalition. We did a playbook, and then it just fizzled. We basically, I think, because the speaker debacle kept happening on the Republican side, where they can't keep a leader, that they basically don't have capacity to run us through the regular process. So there is a chance that we're going to see a last minute reauthorization of certain programs in the Farm Bill. But I have sort of been telling people I don't gamble, but if I were a gambling person, I would I would bet that we don't have like a robust ability to really get a lot of cool climate stuff in there. The best we might hope for is pushing for increased funding for existing authorizations. So that's a disappointment. And then the other defense I would say is the very first bill that the House Republicans passed when they took over control of the House this Congress, well, HR 1 included provisions that would have repealed very important clean energy tax and other types of incentives that were included in the Inflation Reduction Act. And we need to protect those. There are only hope at the moment for really achieving any climate any carbon reductions. So we really need to hold on and watch for those. And then you all need to listen to Pablo, because he shows up in all of the best places I know of. He has made sure that you all are represented at various coalitions like People versus Fossil Fuels. So I have faith that you all have very competent representation anywhere and everywhere that, intel is being shared. So I have faith that Pablo is going to activate you all in time when there are opportunities. And then let me just jump, since we're also kind of starting to hit the end of the hour, is regarding Becca Balnett. And this is a question that we got with Bernie all the time. Is like, we agree with our member. What is the use in pushing her when we agree with her, right? Isn't it you only want to hear from people who oppose? And so I would say, first of all, you might be shocked that how much she's hearing from people who disagree with her. And so it's really important for her to continue to hear from the Vermonters who do stand up for justice and who do stand up for racial equity and who do stand up for the planet. It is important that she be able to tell other Democrats too, especially where she needs to stay in a very progressive position, and maybe take a position that is not necessarily the most politically popular. She may need to tell leadership, look, Vermonters, those crazy environmentalists, they're just demanding that I stand with the planet. So that's what I'm going to have to do. So even for members where they are lefty and you agree with everything they've ever said and you love them, because we love Becca, she is amazing. And we're so happy that Vermont has finally elected a female for the first time ever to their federal delegation, and that we have a queer person from Vermont's delegation for the first person ever. So, but that said, she needs to know that that this is important to you. And then more than that, I think in particular with relation to climate issues, she's being forced to look at all these issues. There's Gaza and there's Ukraine, and there's President Biden putting a lot of pressure on all Democrats to get on board and just buck up and support the president, And so it's also important that she be able to say, hey, what about climate change? We didn't do enough with Inflation Reduction Act. I'm hearing from Vermonter, I'm hearing a lot about climate change. Yes, I'm hearing a lot about Gaza, but I'm also hearing still a lot about climate change, and it'll help her know how to prioritize the various issues, because members can only pay attention to so many things at one time, and the true is same of their staff.
Thank you so much. I remember in my first internship up on Capitol Hill, the member said, Pablo, when I got to Congress, I had 20 issues that I really cared about. And as a freshman member of Congress, I learned that really I was only going to be able to act on 10. And of that 10, I'm really only going to get success on 3. Everything else is a negotiation in favor of those 3 things that I care most about. So your comments ring true to me, at least. With that, I want to thank you. I want to tell everybody that we're going to linger for our typical UUSJ warm and sort of after services, coffee hour, lingering, helping you process vibe. No one should feel compelled to do that and to join us for that. But for those who want to, you are warmly invited to do so. And with that, I hand the mic back to Reverend Dr. Beth Johnson to close out our sacred space.
Well, Katie, thank you so much. I just want to take a breath with you again. I want to begin with the breath and end with the breath because, beloveds, we begin our lives with the breath. Spirit is with us in the breath. As close as our breath is our breath. And in our last breath receives us. Dr. Barber, William J. Barber, once asked, what would you do if this was your last breath? With your last breath. And so I just want to pause before we hit the next thing in deep gratitude for everyone who's here. Katie, amazing, and Pablo, and Paulette, and everyone here for your commitment. So as you go through your day and you remember that you're breathing, may it remind you of who and whose you are, that you belong to life. We belong to life. And that we carry that commitment and that breath with us in all that we do. And with every breath, we love and act and hope and have joy, because we were made for these times, for such a time as this. I'm inspired by Esther in the Hebrew scriptures for such a time as this, beloveds. It is good to be with you. I extinguished this flame. You know what? I'm going to keep it lit because we're going to hang out for a little bit. Because I don't think we should put it out for coffee hour. So there we go. Deep bows, everyone.